All right, everyone. Well, it is 11:30, so we're going to get started. Welcome to our webinar, Putting Reflection to Work, Practical Teaching Strategies, Part 1, presented by Dr. Heather Bastian with the Communication Across the Curriculum program. We're very excited to have you. A few housekeeping tips. Please keep in mind that if you have a question, to either press the raised hand icon on the underneath the names of participants, or if you want to type your question in the chat box, that would be really great, because I'll be monitoring that, and then we can look through the chat box and find all of your questions there. So if you just want to type hello in the chat box real quick to make sure it's working, that would be great. And just make sure send to all participants. If you send it just to me, Heather won't be able to see it. So just please go ahead and just say hello if you can in the chat box. And I see some of you are doing to presenter, some of you are doing to panelists. So again, please make sure send to all participants. All participants. Otherwise, we won't see all your comments. All right. And of course, if you do encounter any WebEx issues, remember you can always mute your microphone, call 750-500 for help. We will be recording this, so you can always access it later if something goes crazy. All participants is not an option. Oh, well, that sounds pretty interesting. Well, I will look into that as we put it to, okay, all panelists will work for the moment. Is there an all attendees option that potentially is working? Can you do all attendees? Okay.
I can see all panelists, Jessica. That one's fine.
That's good. All right, let's go with that for today, and I will try to figure out in the background how to get all participants activated. But let me turn it over now to Heather, and she is going to lead us through her fantastic presentation.
Okay, thank you, Jessica. And thank you to those who are viewing now and in the future for joining us for part 1 of a 2-part series on teaching reflection. For those of you who don't know me, let me just give a little bit of my background. I am the Associate Director of the Communication Across the Curriculum program, CXC for short. I hold my PhD in rhetoric and composition, and one of my areas of research is the teaching of writing. Before joining UNCC just this past August, I was an associate professor of English. I've taught writing for 12 years, and I taught everything from first-year writing to business writing, advanced research writing, and some graduate-level writing. So that's the background that I bring with today to talk to you about teaching reflection. Part 1 is going to really be big picture. So what is reflection, and what are some general considerations for teaching it? So this is going to be the big picture one. Part 2, which will be next Thursday, the exact same time, is going to really narrow in on specific teaching strategies. So once you have the big picture, we'll zoom in on those specific ones. So to get started, zooming us way out, we want to be thinking about why incorporate reflection into your teaching? You're already here, so you probably have some ideas about this, so I won't spend too much time on it. But what we know is that reflection promotes metacognition, and the research has been fairly clear that metacognition is going to allow students to engage in some deep learning and deep engagement with your course content. So by promoting reflection and teaching reflection in your classes, you're really helping to teach course content. It's not like you're just teaching reflection, it's helping them learn the course content. One of the reasons why it's engaging in this deep learning is because reflection encourages students to really look for connections between experiences, theories, and course content. So it's not going to do sort of a route memorization of content. It's asking them to really think about how does this reach out and connect to other areas, other experiences, other things I've been reading. And that's going to really engage that metacognitive process and get that deep learning. Researchers who have done this kind of work and looked at metacognition have suggested that if they're looking for these connections between these experiences and they're engaging in this deep learning, it's going to increase a sense of ownership of learning and course content for students. So they'll have more ownership over that process. So that's a very brief sort of, okay, so why should I even bother incorporating reflection into my teaching? So you're thinking, all right, yeah, great, reflection's great, it's going to help me as a teacher, it's going to help me teach my content, but why do I actually have to teach it? Why don't they already know how to do it? There's several reasons. The biggest issue is that students most likely have limited exposure to reflection, if any at all, prior to your course. K through 12 and even most of higher ed just does not promote reflection as a primary mode of learning. We can say there are lots of reasons why, and we can talk about that, but whether it's right or wrong or whatever it is, that's the case. So they probably don't have a lot of experience with it. Unfortunately, though, reflection requires practice, feedback, and time to develop. So it's not something that you're just going to pick up over a weekend or even over a semester. It's just like writing. It's just like any other host, right, of abilities. They're going to take time to develop. So you need to be developing it over time. So you can see we're kind of in a perfect storm situation here. It takes time to develop. They probably don't have a lot of experience with it. And even if they do have experience with it, it may not be the kind of reflection that your discipline requires, because different disciplines have different kinds of reflection. They're looking for different things in reflection. What people call reflection varies. It varies from what is reflection at K through 12, what is reflection at higher ed, what is reflection even in graduate studies. It's going to be different. So if you want students to reflect in your discipline and course, you do need to explicitly teach them how to do it and provide opportunities for them to practice it over time. So now you're thinking, okay, great. So I know this is going to help me teach, and I know I have to teach it, but I have no idea what the heck it is. Well, you're not alone, because reflection is kind of one of those mushy topics, or I guess they would call it elastic topics. It means different things to different people. The way I like to think about reflection is not saying I teach reflection, but rather I teach reflective thinking, because that's what reflection is. It's a habit of the mind, it's a process, it's an action, however you prefer to think of it. But really what I'm teaching is reflective thinking, this process. I'm teaching them how to go through this process. There are lots of different models for that process. But the one I like, it's nice and simple, it's sort of chant-like. You can get students to say it together in a group, is the what, so what, now what. That's the process that you're asking students to engage in, that thinking process. The what, you're asking them to select and describe an experience, an event, a reading, a theory, a research paper, whatever it is, they're selecting it and they're describing it. They're then saying, okay, so what? This is when they move to the analytical piece, the theory piece, the research piece. So what? So what that I read that? How does that connect to this other theory? How does this reading connect to my practicum? How does this connect to my experience in this other class? So you're asking them to analyze. And then the third step is the now what? Okay, I have this event or this reading, I've analyzed it, what am I going to now do with that? How am I going to apply that perhaps to a research project, or a paper I'm giving, or a speech, or how am I going to apply that to my next reading, whatever it may be. So what we're teaching students when we're teaching reflection, really I like to think reflective thinking. I'm teaching them a what, so what, now what process. But as we know, we can't see thinking. Unfortunately, wouldn't it make all our lives easier if we could just see what people are thinking? Although I don't know if I want to know what everyone's thinking all the time. But we can't see this reflective thinking. So students do have to demonstrate it to us. And how they demonstrate it to us is through reflective writing and speaking. And here they're producing some kind of product, presentation, an artifact. If you're doing an e-portfolio, artifact is a word they like to use there. And when they're producing this reflective writing and speaking, it can be informal or it can be formal. And let me just say a little bit about what those two mean. Informal reflective writing and speaking is usually short. It's not in depth. It doesn't take a ton of time. It's what some people call low stakes. I like using the term low risk instead, which means it's not weighted very heavily in terms of a grade. And it's mostly informal reflective writing and speaking is mostly for the student. It's a chance to get them to practice. That's the point of it. Formal reflective writing and speaking is usually high stakes or high risk, which means it's weighted heavily in a grade. It receives a grade. It is usually longer. It requires more in-depth study, research, and ultimately the audience, it's not just for the student, it's usually for the professor, or it could be for an external audience, but it's usually for somebody outside of the student, so an external audience. Those products and presentations of reflective writing and speaking can be informal or formal, and I will suggest to you both. They could be written or spoken. So it doesn't have to just be done in writing. It can be done in spoken. It can be part of class discussion just as easily as it can be an essay. It can be done inside or outside of class. So you can have them do reflecting in class, but they can also reflect as they're doing readings. You can assign a reading and have them do a reflection of that reading outside of class. But regardless of what it is, whether it's informal, formal, written, spoken, inside or out of class, at the higher education level, we want it to be evidence-based and analytical. And this is the big difference that most of your students are going to have if they are going to see if they already have experience with reflection. They might not have been asked to make it as analytical and as evidence-based as we'd like at the higher education level. But there are ways that we can address that. So I'm going to look at general considerations here for teaching reflective thinking. I'll start with informal reflective thinking and give you some general considerations, and I'll move to formal, and then I'll bring them back together. For informal reflective thinking, you really want to design guided questions. They can be given in writing or they can be given verbally. And the reason you want to design these guided questions is because the what, so what, now what thinking process makes sense to us. We know what we mean by that. But most students are not going to know what that means. Those questions are a bit too general and vague for them. So you want to give them more specific, precise questions that are going to guide them through that process so that they can see what it looks like. So, for example, this could be something done at the end of a class. Identify something you learned today. Provide specific evidence from the class. Notice this is the what part of it, but I've given them a very precise what to include. Also notice I have asked them to provide specific evidence from the class. I'm having them practice providing evidence. If they said, okay, well, what do you mean by evidence? I'd say, well, what particular moment? What was said? Record those details. Moving on to the second part of that reflective thinking process, how has this changed your way of thinking? This is that so what piece. So I'd ask them to think about that. This thing that you learned, how has it changed your way of thinking? You can make it more precise. Say you're covering cell bio, and you might say, how has this changed your way of thinking about this mechanism in the cell, right? You can make it even more precise. And then the third one, I'm asking them to move on to that third process, which is, what will you now do with this information, and provide a concrete action. That's the now what. So I've worked them through this process, and I've given them precise instructions, provide specific evidence, provide a concrete action, and I'm having them do that analytical piece. So this is showing them, here's what it looks like to engage in reflective thinking. In addition to providing those specific questions, it's helpful to think of informal reflective writing that you're really responding to it rather than assessing it. And remember, the primary purpose of informal reflective thinking is for the student to practice. It's not for you, it's for the student to practice, have them practice it. So that sort of strict, like you're going to get a 1 out of 5 here, you're taking the pressure off of that, and instead you're responding. What does that response look like? you're posing questions and really providing observations. You're giving them feedback in terms of, okay, how are you working through this process? So if I asked them to do this informal end-of-class reflection and I was responding to it, I might think, if it was in response to, let's say, a reading, I would say, have you considered how this relates to this other reading in class? What about this other part of the text that seems to contradict what you're saying? What if this part of the text changed? What if this occurred? What if that occurred? How does this relate to this other thing we've been talking about in class? Here you're encouraging them to push their analytical thinking piece of it, right? You're pushing them in the so what. Instead of posing these as questions, you can provide them as observations. Like, this made me think of this part of the reading, right? This made me think about this. So you're pushing them, you're showing them what does this so what analytical piece of reflection look like. If you're concerned that just responding isn't going to be enough impetus for students to take it seriously, you can provide credit, no credit. If you give quizzes in the class where it's like, say, a 5-point quiz, you can just provide, you get a 5 or a 0. So you're not evaluating it, you're giving responses, but you're saying, hey, you showed up, you did this, 5 points, or you get 0 points. I've used that system in the past, and I've never had a problem with it. Occasionally, I have a student who's phoning it in, and I just pull them aside and say, hey, we both know you're phoning this in. If you don't start picking it up, you're going to get zeros even though you're doing this. And that always seems to take care of that problem. If you're in a large class, or if you just have so many students, you're like, I couldn't possibly respond to all this informal reflective writing, TAs, preceptors, and peers can be trained to respond to informal writing. There's no reason you couldn't give them this list of questions and have them respond to the writing with that. So you don't have to do that response. You can put it on them to do that response, their peers, preceptors, or TAs. And if you want to provide that credit, no credit, TAs could easily do that. So that's for informal reflective writing. For formal reflective thinking, just like you want to provide specific guided questions for informal reflective thinking, for formal reflective thinking, you still want to provide specific structured prompts. And I've just pulled one here that I have used in the past. This was for an upper level junior senior cultural rhetorics course. And you'll notice here I have it blocked that this is the self-reflective cover piece. So it's structured, it has this is what you're going to be doing, this is how long it's going to be, this is who the audience is, and here's what you'll be doing. I'm going to move to the next one because this will make it a little clearer. In providing that structured prompt, you want to make sure you're identifying at least 3 elements, the first one being genre. And you'll notice here, my first blue is it's a self-reflective cover piece. So they should know what kind of thing they're expected to compose. It could be a letter, it could be an essay, it could be a journal, it could be lots of different things, but you want to say, what should this look like? For this class, I told them it was a self-reflective cover piece, and we spent maybe a few minutes in class saying, like, okay, well, what is that? Notice also I've identified the audience, and this is important. Because mostly the audience is going to be us as the professors, and you're like, well, of course they know that I'm the audience. Yes, that's true. But the best thing about, one of the great things about reflection is you don't have to be the audience. When I teach business writing, I also have them put together a portfolio, but the audience of their reflection is their future employer. So that they have to write about what does this portfolio tell a future employer about me. So it can be you, but it can be a future employer. It could be family. It could be peers. It could be past teachers, right? You can be creative with the audience. And then providing that specific purpose. Up here, if you look under the goal, I have an overall purpose. The self-reflective piece, it should demonstrate your engagement and development over the semester, and then at the bottom in blue, I've specified what that means. You'll notice this takes the what, so what, now what structure. You're going to point to specific pieces in the portfolio and readings that particularly influenced you. You're going to provide a narrative, and you're going to discuss what you're taking from the course. What, so what, now what. And just like for any assignment, you want to make sure you have those detailed criteria. And think about evaluating it holistically. Criteria can be made into a rubric. I prefer criteria. So I'm basically saying this is how I will be evaluating your self-reflective piece, because this is formal, right? It's going to get a grade. This portfolio is 25% of their final grade. You know, it's a big piece of it. You'll notice here I have the first bullet is the self-reflective cover piece, and then I have detailed what I'm going to be looking for. These words should be familiar to you. You'll see analysis and evidence, right? Clear and detailed analysis, accurate, insightful assessment, clear and detailed description and application, appropriate evidence, logical organization, adherence to expectations and conventions of academic writing, because it's a formal piece, and that relative freedom from error. So I've detailed here, this is what I'm looking for. I'm looking for something that has evidence and analysis. Again, telling them, like, that's what reflection is. It is evidence and it is analysis. And in this case, assessment as well. So bringing that all together, the biggest sort of takeaway from the big picture is really you want students practicing reflective thinking throughout the semester. If you wait and you only give a reflective, let's say you do a reflective essay at the end of the semester, it's the only reflection they've done all semester, you probably are not going to be thrilled with the responses. Because they haven't done it before, they don't really know what they're doing, and they haven't had a chance to practice it. And that might be why you're joining me today, because you've had that experience. You've had them do reflection, and you're like, this really isn't what I'm looking for. It's not what I want. But if you get them practicing it throughout the semester, you can improve that quality of the formal by doing those informal reflective thinking, right? It allows them to practice it. And you can give that feedback on it before you get to that big piece. So informal reflective thinking can be incorporated into every class period, and it can be only periodically collected, so you don't have to collect it all the time or not at all. I never in any of my classes collected every single informal reflection piece, right? I might pick it up occasionally, but not every single time. Remember, again, it's for the students, not really for you. It's to get them practicing. And then if you do collect it, you don't have to be the one to respond to it all the time. TAs can, preceptors can, peers can. I occasionally like to collect them, especially the end of class reflections, or if I'm having them reflect on what's your current understanding of a concept, just because it's kind of like a quiz, but it gives me even more insight into how are they understanding the concept, right? So I can be like, ooh, we don't really understand this concept, I have to return to it. But if you pick them up, you have a class of 25, you don't need to spend more than a minute on any of them, right? You can sort of blow through them, you're just looking at them briefly. You're not correcting them, you're not assessing them, you might be putting a few responses, that's it. Then by the time you get to that formal reflective thinking piece, they'll have that practice, they'll kind of see a little bit more about what you're looking for, they'll be in the habit of getting evidence and analysis, so they will be better prepared for it. But as with any sort of writing or speaking, it has to be drafted and revised. And then you can encourage the use of the Writing Resource Center and Speaking Center to help them develop it. Reflection is hard. You should tell them that. It's not something that they just be like, oh, I'm just going to sit down and reflect a little bit. No, like it's hard to do this work. So make sure you're using your resources, right? Getting to the Writing Center, getting to the Speaking Center, working through it. It's hard work with other people. So that wraps up sort of the big picture of, all right, why reflection? Why should I teach it? What is it? What are some big picture things I should be thinking about? Next Thursday, same time, same place, I'll be providing specific informal and formal reflective activities that you could use in class. And for that webinar, I'll break it down according to, like, if you want to spend a lot of time responding to reflection, here are activities that are good for you. If you want to spend some time responding to reflection, here are some activities that are good for you. If you want to spend no time responding to reflection, here are some activities that are good for you. So I'll address that wide range that will hopefully suit most of your needs. In the meantime, Please feel free to contact CXC. I have our web address here. We have a brand new website update that we're really excited about. Our goal at CXC is to work with departments and individuals to help you incorporate reflection or any other aspect of communication into your curriculum. We want to help you be successful working with and teaching students that communication piece. So please don't hesitate to contact us. I do have a handout that Jessica will be sending for these webinars. There's the Dropbox link here. She'll send it out after this webinar. But do note that the handout will really only make sense for Part 1 and Part 2. Only one box addresses Part 1, the rest of it addresses Box 2. So I think we have a few minutes for questions. Did I do it right, Jessica? If she's there. Jessica? I think you can send questions in the box.
Can you hear me yet? Yes?
Yeah, now I can hear you. Yeah.
All right. Sorry about that, guys. I switched it back to me. So we've had our wonderful presentation. Please type your questions in the box so that Heather can answer them. I see thank yous so far. And like I said, I will be emailing, or as Heather said, I will be emailing that handout to everybody that's attended today. And if anybody tells you, man, I really wish I caught that presentation, how cool is that? I did record it, and it will be on the CTL's website. So by all means, if somebody feels like they want to come to Part 2, but they missed out on Part 1, there is a way to see that.
And if you can't make Part 2,
same
we're
thing.
recording that as well, and we'll send it out.
Exactly. Not seeing any questions, lots of awesome and thank you and helpful, which is just great to hear. I'm really, really glad that everyone's been so pleased with this webinar. Please keep in mind that we do have other webinars you can sign up for at CTL's website, teaching.uncc.edu. Some of our webinars talk about other teaching topics, and again, this is where you can find Heather's Part 2.
If you think of any questions, you know, if after this sets for a little bit and you want to work through some things, please send me an email. Again, we're happy to work with you. We're here as a resource for faculty to help them feel confident and comfortable incorporating writing and speaking into their curriculum.
Fantastic. Well, everyone, please have a wonderful day, and thanks again for joining us.
Thank you, Jessica.